was delayed getting here to the floor because of a number of meetings, but the most particularly and sort of fitting was a session with James Lee Witt, former administrator of FEMA, who did a superb job during his tenure at FEMA and who actually initiated Project Impact, which is the predecessor of the legislation, or the predecessor idea for the legislation we bring to the floor today. It was called then Project Impact. And it was the idea of Administrator James Lee Witt, after his experience with a number of tragedies that could have been prevented or substantially mitigated. That is, the effect of the natural disaster could substantially have been mitigated if cities, counties, states, local agencies had taken a few practical steps that would be far lower cost in initial impact than the broader costs of a natural disaster, whether an earthquake, a flood, a hurricane, or other tragedy. Over 100 communities actually participated in Project Impact. One of the most significant beneficiaries of Project Impact was the city of Seattle, which was awarded a grant of $50 million for very specific actions to take in Seattle to strengthen buildings, strengthen bridges, strengthen portions of the Alaska Way viaduct, portion of Highway 5 that goes through the city of Seattle and is a focal point of a great deal of maritime activity and trucking and passenger vehicle activity. For $50 million investment, they put all of the strengthening position or activities in place, and a year later, the earthquake struck Seattle. And the mayor of Seattle, I think it was Mayor Nichols at the time, said, if we had not made this investment, it would have cost the people of Seattle $500 million to repair the damage that the earthquake would have caused had they not made this very small investment. The irony of the event and of the announcement is that was also the day that the Bush administration chose to terminate Project Impact. I have experience in my district of pre-disaster mitigation when in 1999 hurricane-like force winds blew through the Boundary Waters canoe area, a wilderness area on the U.S.-Canadian border in my district. It stretches nearly 110 miles along the Canadian border. They're called a derecho, D-E-R-E-C-H-O, derecho from the Spanish. C-H-O, derecho from the Spanish. Straight line winds, 15 mile across, 40 miles in length, at 100 miles an hour, blew down 26 million trees. The U.S. Forest Service did a computer analysis of all previous forest fires and calculating with the amount of fuel on the ground that when a lightning strike would hit that blown down, drying out timber, it would create a fireball 50,000 feet into the air. Action had to be taken in the areas outside the wilderness to protect homes and resort facilities and outfitter facilities, and within the boundary waters to do controlled burns, because timber harvesting is not allowed within a wilderness area. We turn to James Lee Witt and FEMA for pre-disaster mitigation funding to support homes to install sprinkler systems and resorts to install sprinkler systems. 4 years later, a fire known in the area as the Ham Lake Fire broke out. The local volunteer fire department, attempting to respond, found that their pumper truck was inoperative. It could have put the fire out in that little area, but they were unable to. It gathered force and burned 76,000 acres, half in the U.S. and half in Canada. The homes that were spared were those that had installed the sprinkler systems from the FEMA pre-disaster mitigation program. The ones that didn't have the sprinkler systems or who didn't maintain them were burned. 148 structures in all burned, 135 were saved. This legislation will establish the establish the pre-disaster mitigation program out into the future, because while the previous Project Impact was terminated, Congress under the previous Republican years reinstated the Project Impact as pre-disaster mitigation, and the authority will sunset on September 30th. So with bipartisan support, we bring this legislation to the floor to extend the program. Clearly, mitigation saves money. I gave an example of a situation in my district, but the devastation of flooding in the Red River in North Dakota is another example of the real impact of natural disasters. And the communities along the Red River of the North, on both the Minnesota and North Dakota side, have benefited from pre-disaster mitigation funding. Nonetheless, they face huge challenges every year. The Congressional Budget Office and the National Institute of Building Sciences have issued reports showing that for every dollar spent on pre-disaster mitigation, future losses are reduced by $3 to $4. The Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council, advisory body of the National Institute of Building Sciences, said, quote, "A dollar spent on mitigation saves society an average of $4, close quote. And that flood mitigation, according to the council, yields even greater savings. On average, future losses are reduced, quote, by about $3 for every dollar spent on those projects, including both federal and non-federal spending, close quote." I also cited the city of Seattle. I misquoted the mayor. It was not Mayor Nichols, it was Mayor Paul Schell, who deserves great credit for wisely using pre-disaster mitigation funds just prior to the Nisqually earthquake hitting on February 28, 2001. The Red River of the North investments made by cities on both the Minnesota and North Dakota side have resulted in far less damage than those communities experienced prior to making those investments. After the 1997 flood, FEMA spent $23 million to acquire vulnerable homes and move them out of the floodplain. In 2006, a flood came within 2 feet of the 1997 flood level, and those mitigation investments saved some $24.6 million, a return of 107% on the investment made. Mitigation clearly is an investment in people, in property, in protection, and that's why the National Association of Counties, the International Association of Emergency Managers, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, the National Emergency Management Association, and the National Association of Flood and Stormwater Management Agencies, as well as the Public Works Association, all have endorsed this legislation. So I earnestly appeal for a strong vote